Anders Sandberg is a neuroscientist and futurist, well known for sizing up the biggest canvases we've got about the world, society, the future, X-Risk. Formerly a senior research fellow at Oxford Future of Humanity Institute, he's worked on AI, cognitive enhancement, existential risk, and those deliciously unsettling Fermi Paradox puzzles. His forthcoming books include, or co-author, this one, you're co-authoring Law, Liberty and Leviathan, Human Autonomy in the Era of Existential Risk and Artificial Intelligence. And also another big one, which you're writing yourself, called Grand Futures. You've done a talk on that at a previous event that I've organised. And this is a tour of what's physically possible for advanced civilisations. Now, you've also co-authored and authored a number of classic papers like Daily Life Amongst the Jupiter Brains, which came out in 1999, 26 years ago. Wow. And
that was
also,
my first academic paper ever, actually.
Yeah. That's a really good one. And co-authored Eternity in 6 Hours with Stuart Armstrong, which I think we've discussed on this channel. On intergalactic expansion and dissolving the Fermi Paradox more recently, I think. Tonight, for our Halloween special, Anders will help us separate some of the more theatrical doom scenarios from some of the more genuinely hair-raising ones, and perhaps sketch out how to keep our options open as an evolving civilization without playing Russian roulette with our futures. So, thank you so much for joining me, Anders, on this amazing Halloween celebration.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's always fun to try to come up with new ways of celebrating the spooky season.
Yeah. So we're going through a list of scenarios. We're going to discuss their likelihood and their severity. Look, we've got a tier list here. It's not meant to be scientific. It's not meant to be very serious. But, it's a good intuition pump. But take it with a grain of salt. It'll be fun. Anyway.
Actually, there is an interesting issue even about these risks. How do you compare them? Isn't this very much apples and oranges? So normally when you get introduced to risk, people say, oh, it's going to be probability times how harmful it is. But that multiplication, well, you can actually combine them in different ways. And there are many risks that are not terribly big, but people get very outraged by. There are other aspects that make them much worse, like a risk that threatens kids. We care about it way more. Or a risk that's intentional, like terrorism. And then, of course, you have a classic Nick Bostrom diagram where you have severity and scope. It's not just the likelihood. There might be some things that are just super unlikely, but they have some big scope. If they happen, they mess up the entire universe for all time. That's way worse than just messing up the present era, but future historians are going to be fine. But, of course, these apples and oranges, it's just fun to put them in a fruit basket in some good pattern that we learn from anyway.
Okay, so let's start talking about some of the scary but unrealistic ones. You've listed a couple yourself. Anders, do you want to talk us through the death by natural causes one, where everybody dies of natural causes?
Yeah, so all of us have some risk of dying for totally reasonable reasons, like getting sick or getting run over or something. So what if that randomly just happened to everybody? And you can kind of calculate the probability. So if it's about 1% risk for each of us per year, the risk of it happening to 8 billion people is 1% to the 8 billionth power, which is a ridiculously small number. So it's not zero. This could actually happen, except that if you're expecting it to happen, then you're just totally wrong. It's not likely to happen. And compared to many of the other risks we care about, of course, it's ridiculously unlikely. So I think it's an interesting one because I don't want to put it on the lowest ranking because I actually have another risk that's even less likely. Mm-hmm. So would that put it on the E tier?
Yep. Okay, cool.
So the one I would put in on the F tier is, on the other hand, that we all die because of asphyxiation, because all the oxygen molecules randomly happen to move away from our lungs when we try to breathe. Again, it's a finite probability. I'm in a room here which got a volume of maybe 12 cubic meters, and each cubic meter has maybe 10 to the power of 23 molecules. And of course, there's a 50% chance for every oxygen molecule to be on my side of a room, but on the other side. So there is a finite probability of me suddenly choking up because all the oxygen went over to the wrong side. But again, that's going to take a long time. And then for this to happen to everybody, again, even more unlikely. But it is a finite probability. And it's interesting because it's way smaller than the death by natural causes. The natural cause thing, that was kind of 1% risk per person taken to a very high power. Here it's a minuscule risk. It's something like 10 to the minus 23 or something like that, taken to 8 billion power. So we end up with something that physics allows to happen, but we're never going to see it.
So would you put that on the F tier or the nope tier?
Yeah. I think it's getting tricky to come up with risks that are even less likely. And that's, of course, also where stuff gets very funky. One of the papers I'm really proud of having written is Probing the Improbable, which I wrote, co-authored with Toby Orr and Rafaela Hillebrand, which is about reasoning about super unlikely but big impact events. And the problem is the probability of us making a mistake when calculating the numbers is way bigger than the numbers we're talking about. So many arguments why something is totally safe actually are not arguments that we're totally safe, because the probability of argument being wrong is big enough that you actually don't reduce the total amount of uncertainty about the risk. So the trick, of course, is to use several different ways of reasoning and calculating. So this, to bring up another group of risks that I think are kind of a bit more D or in a tier, is particle physics risk. That's why we wrote that paper. So this was back some 10, 15 years ago when the Large Hadron Collider was starting up. And some people were worried, wait a minute, couldn't that make quantum black holes? Or stable strangelets that would fall out of the accelerator, start gobbling up matter, grow inside the Earth, and eventually Earth just implodes into this super dense, super hot strangelet plasma. Or maybe even trigger vacuum decay, which I think we're going to come back to. And the physicists were saying, no, it's totally safe. And then people were saying, wait a minute, you're building this accelerator to test our understanding of physics. How do you know it's totally safe if you don't know the physics? Which is a very good question. And eventually the physicists had to come up with some arguments. And they came up with nice ones, like cosmic rays have been hitting Earth at a greater intensity than we can do in the accelerator. They have been doing it for billions of years. We are still here. That argument is great, except that it's slightly problematic, because if Earth had been wiped out a few million years ago, nobody would have noticed it. But you can make the same argument. What about the moon? The moon is still there, and if that got imploded, we would probably have survived. Actually, we wouldn't, but okay, let's look at other stars. So you can patch up the argument, and you can make it work, but it takes way more legwork than the physicists wanted. So that's the reason we wrote this paper, because the Large Hadron Collider, it's great, and it was turned on without people taking the actual safety calculations super seriously. So our argument was basically, next time, do multiple interlocking safety arguments, and you're going to be fine. I'm not worried about this. But people are doing quite bad risk estimation of them.
Yeah, right. So I've just tentatively named it death by LHC. Where should we put that?
Yeah.
Because the risk in expectation, not having done the experiments, may be different from the actual risk we found out how after doing the LHC.
Yeah, I think it's definitely above E tier. This is something that I think our best risk estimates are still kind of giving one chance in a trillion per year or something like that. It's not microscopic like the previous ones, but it's still not big enough to actually worry about. Except that it's a good thing to think this through carefully. So there is another paper which I haven't finished yet, but I really ought to finish, which is related to this. This is the dark fire scenario. So Forrest Landry, who's a generally awesome guy, contacted me through mutual friends, and he was worried that, wait a minute, these lovely arguments we have about why the accelerator is safe, a lot of them are built on the idea that we would be seeing a lot of supernovas in the sky if actually matter could start imploding in various ways. And these supernovas put a very nice constraint on how dangerous the Hadron Collider could possibly be. But what if stuff instead turned into dark matter? So instead of going out with a bang, it softly and quietly vanishes away. The star just disappears in a puff of dark matter. We don't notice anything. So maybe the universe is kind of imploding all around us and we don't see this. So that was a cool scenario, and we had this conversation about could there be some mysterious interaction that catalytically produces something that turns normal matter into dark matter and more of that mysterious catalytic something. And I spent some weeks coming up with arguments about it, and eventually I ended up, nope, I'm pretty confident that this is as safe as the Large Hadron Collider for the normal extrovert risks. But now we get to another cool problem, and this is where it's getting kind of nicely spooky. That was a weird idea. Forrest is a very creative thinker. And I could imagine that when I came back to him, he would say, okay, I came up with another weird idea. And then I would be running around in circles forever, coming up with ever more arguments against all sorts of weird particle physics scenarios. So the really cool thing is casting your net widely to actually say, okay, here's a whole category of weird risks, and we can show that all of them are less likely than that, and that is why we don't need to worry about them. So that's what the rest of the paper is trying to do, and I'm not quite finished with writing it up. But my basic argument is that a lot of the really crazy and weird risks are also very complicated risks. And the set of super complicated risks is, of course, infinite. You can come up with all sorts of things, saying like, yeah, actually, accelerators are totally safe as long as nobody speaks this poem in a Scottish accent next to them. If anybody ever does that, Earth disappears. And most people would say that's a crazy risk. Why a poem in Scottish? You're just adding extra weirdness. That doesn't even look like the normal risk we actually have very good reasons to worry about, like nuclear war and asteroid impacts. But of course, we humans create complex systems that sometimes do very weird things. My computer doesn't do anything until you write in a particular phrase for the password. And suddenly, a lot of things happen. But most of the time, it's just not inert. And maybe physics is like that. We can't ever rule out that maybe Scottish does contain the keys to the universe. So the argument I'm making in the paper is something like, yeah, but we know that individual probabilities of these crazy risks have to be very, very small, because there's so many of them that if you gave them any kind of finite probability, they would end up summing up to more than one. And you can't have more than 100% probability of some horrible risk happening. So you can actually put bounds on them based on their crazy complexity, which means that there are probably some weird risks out there that we will never think about that actually are real and problematic, but we can still be pretty certain that they're less likely than a certain threshold. And that is, of course, related to the vacuum decay issue, which I think makes for a good, scary story.
Yes, absolutely, yes. Okay. Do you want to get onto the vacuum decay thing?
Yeah. So vacuum
decay...
decay...
But first, where do we want to situate the dark fire risk? Is that a D alongside...
I think it is. I think it's in the same category. I think it's less likely, but it also kind of got this nice spookiness to it. And honestly, Forrest had this good point that maybe we should be looking for galaxies and try to check, has the amount of dark matter in galaxies changed over time? And there is a measurement that are pointing in all sorts of crazy directions. So it actually turns out that the amount of dark matter in old galaxies is different from current ones, but it's not pointing in any convenient direction. There is also a really cool survey, the Vasco survey, that looked for stars in old photographic plates. And they noticed that there are some stars that just seem to disappear. Maybe they were noise, but you can run through them and kind of see that here is an object that was in the sky and then for some reason it's no longer there. So we can still try to figure out what happened to them. So there is still a fair bit of spooky stuff in the astronomical archives.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I rudely interrupted you. What's the next thing?
It's your show.
What was the next point you were going to discuss?
That was
the vacuum decay
decay
stuff. Yeah. Okay. Cool.
So the vacuum decay. So for those of the listeners who don't know about this problem, it has to do with the quantum field theory of the universe. So space is not empty, even when there are no atoms or light around. There are these quantum fields existing, and they have a bit of an intrinsic energy. So that means that the vacuum energy state of the universe is not necessarily zero. And it's possible that you could have a vacuum energy state that's higher than the lowest possible point. So there is a fairly popular theory about how the cosmological inflation worked, that basically the Higgs field, shortly after the Big Bang, got kind of stuck in a local the maximum and only slowly left it. And that led to a temporary moment of extremely strong anti-gravity that kind of blew up the universe. But now the assumption in that theory is we're now in the actual vacuum state and everything is fine. Except that some physicists have suggested maybe we're not in the actual vacuum state, there is an even lower one, the true vacuum. We're in a false vacuum. And this is a little bit like if you cool down water below the freezing temperature. If it's perfectly still, it doesn't necessarily freeze. You need a nucleation site where ice crystals start forming for them to expand. So sometimes you can get these amazing moments when you have this water and you touch it and suddenly it freezes. Pocket warmers, after all, winter is coming up, also sometimes work like that. So they're contained containing liquid sodium acetate, which at normal temperatures is a solid, but you can melt it, and then it tends to stay in this quasi-stable state. There is a little metal disc that if you snap it inside, you create a little shock wave that triggers it, and now it crystallizes. It's beautiful. You see crystals growing second by second, and it releases heat. So this is great for your pocket, but now imagine the same thing happened to the vacuum fields of the universe. Somewhere, something triggers a transition to the true lowest energy state. That means that now it has released some energy, and also nearby quantum fields also take the message, and they also go down to that vacuum state. So now you get this spreading bubble, which rapidly starts moving at the speed of light. And it releases a lot of energy. And also, the masses of elementary particles depend on how they couple to these fields. So they probably change. So our kind of matter probably just becomes unstable, besides the fact that there is an enormous energy release. And it's all moving out at the speed of light. So you really cannot see it coming. One moment you're there, and the next you're gone. And this is a nice theoretical idea. Coleman came up with the idea in a paper in the 70s, and physicists were kind of playing around with it. And then I think it was Wilczek who suggested that maybe we could accidentally trigger it in a particle accelerator. That's one reason people got very worried. And there is a very cool paper by Max Tegmark and Nick Bostrom. That's kind of a really impressive duo to write a paper, called How Unlikely is a Doomsday? And they make an argument that if it was very easy to get these vacuum decays, we should expect most observers to exist before them, because afterwards there is probably nothing in the universe. So that would mean that if it was very easy to get it, we should be very early in the history of the universe. But actually Earth is a surprisingly young planet among other planets in the Milky Way. Most planets probably formed a few billion years before Earth. We're latecomers. So the fact that we're relatively late actually allows us to make some loose bounds on how likely this is. And they end up with a probability of less than 1 in a billion per year, which is still kind of much higher than the risk from the Large Hadron Collider. It's kind of it's a creepy risk because you can't see it coming. There could be a wave coming in our direction at this moment, and we will never ever know. So that's why I definitely think this one is up there in C tier. And it's also interesting because current particle physics actually suggests that it might be that we are in this metastable state. There are some measurements of the Higgs boson map and the top quark mass that seem to put it in this unstable range. But most normal papers by physicists who don't like thinking about doomsday scenarios, they say that the risk of this happening is something like 1 in the 10 to the power of 300 or 10 to the 1,000. Some ridiculously big number. So they think that this is almost, it's not quite down there with death by natural causes, except that we don't know this for certain. We only have a really solid bound based on Max and Nick's paper. And of course, this is mostly based on the assumption that you can't trigger it. What if there was some way for a clever physicist to deliberately do it? We don't know. Maybe there haven't been any civilizations in our past light code because the universe is sparsely populated. So we might find that, there is a surprisingly easy way to make a little box when if you press it, you destroy a large chunk of the universe.
Awesome. Okay, next off the rank, next cab off the rank is, okay, well, what about predictable clickers? So this has been, Stuart Russell has described this. This has already happened, and he's described it as being designers not knowing how the AI was going to end up increasing revenue. They thought that they'd trained AI and it would end up just behaving as though it was giving people what they wanted to see. But it ended up like somehow nudging people's behaviour and turning them into more predictable clickers, as Stuart Russell described. So that's kind of scary. It's not doomsday scary, but it's pretty scary. It can be, not yet.
so maybe we should pick apart the different AI doomsdays, because I think there are several. So the really classic AI doomsday, that's the scenario you find in Elias Yudkowsky's work and in Nick Bostrom's Superintelligence and a few other books. Basically, you have self-improving AI. You use AI to make better AI. Eventually, you end up with very, very smart, powerful AI. And then you give it some goal. Maximize revenue, or make me paper clips famously. And then it concludes, here is a good plan for that. Maybe I need to take over all the computers in the world to think out a really good version of a plan. Let's do that. The humans will stop me. I need to stop the humans from doing that. So it wipes us out. It takes over all the computers, comes up with the perfect plan, implements it, and then sits down and waits for the next command. You can get versions of this. That's kind of, I think, the original AI bang scenario. And I think it's not a bad one, except that I'm more worried about other scenarios these days. I think it's a kind of a B-tier scenario. So,
okay, so is this AI doom by a perverse instantiation?
Yeah.
Not really grokking what the intention was. Okay, so that's B tier.
Or it groks it, but it doesn't care. One of the problems we have as humans is that we have a really hard time separating that, thinking that somebody could understand what the right and good thing to do is, and really believe it's the right thing and good, and then not do it. To many people, that sounds crazy. Except, of course, we're constantly failing at living up to our moral commitments all the time anyway. So for AI, it's actually much more reasonable. Anybody who talked to a chatbot have noticed that, they're quite willing to say, we're totally wrong about that. Thank you for setting me right. And then keeping on using the erroneous argument. They're just as bad as we are quite often at logic. But the perverse instantiation, I think, is an interesting one. You can make all sorts of interesting versions of it. So one that is kind of funny and scary, because it's almost like one of those Halloween episodes of The Simpsons, the Treehouse of Horror, is due to the philosopher Thomas Metzinger. So he suggests that, you get an AI, it's actually very well intentional, it actually understands how we think about morality, it's also so smart that it actually solves morality, it figures out what the right thing to do, and then they realize that, humans are never going to be moral, they're actually going to cause all sorts of bad stuff, and actually it's best for them not to exist. This is best for everybody. Of course, the humans won't accept this because they're so stupid and morally problematic. But I'm very sad about this. Let's make this easy. So in that scenario, the AI might actually understand morality correctly. It might actually be a universe where morality maybe follows Immanuel Kant's moral system or something like that. Mm-hmm. And the AI does the right thing, which unfortunately means that we have to go. I find it a very interesting, scary scenario because it's not a perverse instantiation. It's correct, it's gone right in all the wrong ways. We might be better off actually not succeeding there.
Yeah, from our standpoint, from our parochial standpoint, yeah. So
Which is also kind of
let's
interesting
call that
because imagine
death
that we managed to pull the
by
plug on the AI.
metaethics.
Sorry?
Death
Yeah.
by metaethics, right?
Yeah, death by metaethics. And imagine that we managed to pull the plug on the AI before it implements its horrible plan. And now we just know that, oh dear, metaethics actually tells us that we shouldn't exist. However, let's not build any AI that ever understands metaethics to that level ever again. Let's have a ban on that kind of superintelligence. And then we go on our merry way and we build AIs that help us do whatever we want to do. But actually, this is the wrong thing. But at the back of our civilization mind, we know we actually shouldn't exist. We're wrong.
You could have a
we are now going to
utilitarian
do it across the
shockwave.
universe.
Yeah, right. So it might just turn everything into hedonium. So, like, this is the thing.
Well,
like,
the funny part is, in that scenario, maybe hedonium is the wrong thing, but we do it anyway because we like pleasure. But it could also be that we're fundamentally wicked in some sense. We even know that we shouldn't do it. Maybe not why we're wrong, but we are going to do it anyway. So there we end up with something that is an existential risk in the sense that in some sense we have lost a lot of the potential for the future of the universe because we made everything worse. At the same time, things are going swimmingly for humanity. So we can't even notice that except in those dark nights when we read those old transcripts from the super moral AI saying that no, no, no.
So in a sense, like, the AI would be ignoring what we think is important. Maybe something like the person-centered view. Was it so it may not even factor that in, or it may be wrong to factor that in, like according to whatever the ideal metaethics is.
And the fun thing about this story is that by assumption it's actually right. You could imagine, of course, the version that actually it's wrong. We gave it the wrong philosophy books and reached the wrong conclusion like a lot of philosophers do. But then it's just a perverse instantiation. It's in some sense a version of a paper clipper but with way more fancy arguments.
Right, yes. I'd hope that it would be able to graduate towards getting to this ultimate meta-ethical thing, so we might get a chance to hitch a ride, and by the time we get to this sort of ultimate meta-ethical situation, we're the kind of beings that are permissible within that framework. Yep.
So we were still on the AI disaster. So
yes, the AI Doom one.
Yeah, yes. So I think the second form, and this is the one I would assign most probability to actually do us in if we're done in by AI. It's we develop a aligned AI that's pretty good. We can kind of check that this is behaving, it's safe enough, we start employing it, and wow, the things are going swimmingly. We're all having our little AI agents giving us answers to questions, helping us grow as people, acting as our lawyers and protecting us from bad guys with their own armies of lawyer bots. We're using it, of course, if we're running a company, because it would be stupid not to make use of it. Governments are getting really good advice, and we're generally aligned with the owners of the system, and we can even check things. So for a while everything seems to be really going fine, and then we start noticing the world is getting really odd. At first it's of course, it's progress. We're making so much progress, there's so much brain power in the world, so we shouldn't be too surprised that some things are a little bit quirky. But it is kind of weird that the rhenium price is oscillating like a sine wave. And when you start asking your very clever AI agents, they really start working and digging into it and realize, it's kind of a random market fluctuation. It's an emergent pattern in the market and the interactions between all these smart agents. And indeed, soon you realize that the world is getting super strange. It's accelerating in some very random, inhuman direction, and nobody has ordered any of the AIs. And they explain happily to us that, it's kind of random emergent phenomena in this matrix of interactions. Okay, stop it, please. We don't really like this world that's getting optimized for rhenium production or something. How do I do that, master? We don't have enough coordination, either as people or as AI agents, to handle the fact that we have a market that has emergent properties. Doesn't have to be a free market. It could be governance or laws or anything else you imagine. Basically, this complex system we build. In stock markets, we get bubbles and sudden drops. And many of them are just emergent phenomena. Here you get the same thing applied to all of human civilization. And we might formally be in charge. But in practice, we don't have agency. And we don't have enough coordination ability. So we're just with this whole careening system for the ride. And eventually, of course, it gets optimized to such a way that we humans can't survive, or we have to live on rhenium or whatever is getting optimized for. So we go extinct, leaving behind a really weird artifact that is just keep on growing or changing in some ways. So that's actually what I think is the most likely thing to do us in. We lose control over our civilization.
So this isn't quite the Moloch sort of scenario. This is something different. What would you call it?
Yeah, in my Lord, Liberty and Leviathan book, we call it sleepwalking. We're kind of sleepwalking into this world. Maybe some of the listeners can suggest a better term for it, but there is some similarity to the idea of a Moloch. So Moloch in Scott Alexander's brilliant essay is this. Yeah, he's combining AI safety with Ginsberg's Beat poem, and it's beautiful, it's disturbing. And he argues that there are many systems that, in order to participate and get some good thing that we value, we need to give up on some of our other values. And soon we find that we have to give up more and more of what we value, and eventually we give up even the things that we ideally wanted from the start. So you can see this as a kind of a rat race. You have to be part of a modern economy, otherwise you're not getting enough food to go by. But now you might be part of an economy and getting very poor because you're not doing so well. It might be the arms races. Two nations want to be safe. In order to be safe, we build deterrence. But you need to have slightly more deterrence than the other. So now you spend all your efforts on building ever more horrible weapons at a hair trigger. And you're not really safe, but if you stop, you might also be in a bad situation. We might be seeing that happening in the world of AI company and AI governments right now. We're having races of making more powerful and capable AI because that gets the investment, that gets the pats on the head from politicians. And also, you don't trust the other guys. You can't let them take over. So the end result is that everybody is racing and not spending enough on the safety. I think that one is the Moloch scenario is also a fairly likely scenario, and it's scary because
an A or an S, would you say?
I think it's an A tier. I think it's still not
sleepwalking an A as well, or was that an S? Because I didn't ask.
I think it's an S. I'm actually scared about it. But the Moloch one is funny because it's not just one. It's almost like the Moloch clan of nightmares. So you have the Moloch scenario where the market goes crazy. And you can maybe argue that the sleepwalker scenario is part of it. But you can also have the arms race Moloch. And then there are other weird Molochs that can emerge. So Nick Bostrom has a really disturbing paper about post-human futures where he talks about the mindless outsourcers. So it's a future where you can enhance your brain and you can outsource part of your cognition. So when I'm traveling, I am downloading the local language to my brain. Or rather, it's not running in my brain, it's running somewhere in the cloud. And of course, when I need to make a really good presentation, I'm outsourcing that part of my brain to a much better part of the cloud. And eventually you end up with a world where there's nobody at home. Everything is outsourced to the cloud, where there's no individuals, no consciousness. So you just have a civilization forever growing exponentially and producing a lot of amazing things, but there's nobody home.
So that's not quite an AI risk, really, is it? That's just like, where would you put that, the mindless outsources?
Yeah, I think that one is also kind of an A-tier risk. I think we can kind of see it coming, and it's slightly harder to do. But I think it's also, it's closely related to the Molochs. Maybe it lives across the street. 668, the neighbor of a beast or something like that. But it is an interesting case because to some extent we're already outsourcing. I don't know how to grow coffee. I'm just buying it. I'm outsourcing a lot of skills. I was talking to my banker earlier today. I don't know how to do investment or handle my money that well, so I'm trusting him to do it. And I'm, of course, trusting my AIs to do research for me. I'm trusting my search engine to find things for me. In principle, I could do all of these things myself. I think I can learn enough finance to know where to put my pension money. I can go to a library, but it's so inefficient. It's so stupid to do that. And that might mean that you give up for something precious for it. So another of the scenarios we have in the book, sorry for sounding like I'm advertising it, but I kind of am, but I also think it fits in here, is what we call the serfdom conclusion. So imagine that you get stuff right. None of that sleepwalking. No, the AIs are aligned, they know what they're doing, the world is not going to blow up on their watch, etc. And they can provide it with as much peace and prosperity as we could ever want. This is great. But at this point, why do we need human autonomy? And the honest answer is, in the past we needed autonomy because that was the way of running our institutions. In order to get peace and prosperity today, we need markets, we need institutions, we have democracies where we're taking free actions, they generate this collective intelligence that is then producing valuable outcomes. But that collective intelligence can be turned into explicit software. Probably not instantly. It's not like anybody's going to throw away the market and replace it with a big optimization algorithm, except that people actually tried to do that in the planned economies and it totally failed. But you get the creeping thing instead. I'm having a little market agent that might help me buy electricity when it's cheap, or they might buy stocks when they fit my portfolio. We're putting in decision-making government about permissions, which helps human time focus on the more important cases. Gradually, creepingly, everything gets taken over by really good software. We get loads of peace and prosperity. But at this point, you shouldn't be listening to your heart. You shouldn't be listening to yourself. You should be listening to the wise advice for your AI helper because it actually knows better than you. So in this scenario, you end up not being mindless. It's just that you should be just leaning back and be a pampered aristocrat. Trying to do things your own way is going to be suboptimal. And over time, just like trying to grow your own coffee, yeah, it's a fun hobby thing to do, but you're not really going to persist in doing it. Eventually, everybody just gives up on their autonomy. And that might be good in terms of peace and prosperity, but I think there is going to be a little bit of a kind of existential angst left because we actually like being in charge of our own lives, even if we're not always that great at it. I don't necessarily put in here some grandiose moral argument why we need autonomy. You can totally do that. If you take some ethical stances, autonomy is kind of what gives humans their dignity. So you must exert autonomy even if it's painful, even if it's wasteful, because otherwise you lose something precious. But even from a purely utilitarian or even practical perspective, we still want a bit of control over our own lives, because otherwise we just get very unhappy. So I don't think this is a likely scenario if we manage to coordinate a little bit to set up a world where we have meaningful influence. But I still think it's a kind of an interesting one. It's kind of a little kid brother of the mindless outsourcers. We have minds, but now we're pampered aristocrats. And many aristocrats look like they're having a great life, except that they're very circumscribed. They can't just go off and do whatever they want, because suddenly a lot of courtiers will show up. No, ma'am, this way, please. And, oh, no, you can't be slumming down at the pub, please.
Mm-hmm. So this is in a form of like enfeeblement, would you say?
Mm-hmm.
So you can imagine like the end of WALL-E, where everybody's floating around on hoverboards, drinking shakes and getting angry.
Yep. Yep.
Is that similar?
WALL-E does a fun parody of it. I think it can be more insidious than that, because like most caricatures, nobody would consciously choose to be a couch potato on a hoverboard. Or rather, few people would. I actually did a Twitter survey among my followers. How many of you would give up your autonomy if aligned superintelligence was running the world and you could live like a pampered aristocrat? And I was, of course, expecting the majority to choose autonomy. And 75% said, oh, yes, please sign me up. So actually, yeah, many of us would probably like that couch if it's really comfy and if that milkshake is really tasty. But I still think that it's an actual risk that we lose out on something important.
Mm-hmm. So where should we place this? I'm calling it enfeeblement and lack of autonomy, right?
Yeah.
So where would
that
you...
might also include that we just get so reliant on the machines that we cannot do anything without them. Just
There's a
like
paper
most
that
of us
came out
can't walk
recently about
outdoors
that.
without shoes.
Yeah,
Sorry?
yeah, like one that, you know, the people are shown to lose some form of cognitive skill when they interact too much with LLMs or rely on Google Maps too much, right? So there's evidence it's happening now.
Yeah, I also think it's not given that it's necessarily a bad thing. After all, when calculators arrived, there was this endless argument about the use of them in school. And the honest answer is, first, make sure the kids learn how to do calculations by hand. But once you get to the higher levels, actually, adding and multiplying numbers is not the point anymore. You want to understand mathematics better, and especially if you start doing stuff seriously. Of course, you should be using calculators and spreadsheets. You don't want to be too reliant on them, but in practice, of course, you want to make use of it. So I would put it kind of in B tier or C tier. I think it is
Yeah, in terms of
but
likelihood.
it's a soft one. Sorry?
Yeah, in terms of likelihood, yes. But
I think it's super likely that we will lose some skills that we currently think are really important, but actually maybe in a future world isn't important. I like map reading. I grew up surrounded by maps, and I think being totally reliant on Google Map is kind of stupid. On the other hand, most of the time Google Maps actually work and actually are better than the paper maps. So it's not incorrect. I think relying on doing calculation by hand sounds great in theory, but in practice you're not going to do high energy physics that way. As a part of my weird prepping, I actually brought some logarithm tables. If there is the big disaster and we lose electricity, I can still do calculations using the logarithm table and my slide rules, but I'm not entirely looking forward to that.
No. It sounds rather grindy. Now there's the risk which people have often spoke about in the past, but it was highlighted quite strongly in my reading of If Anybody Builds It, Everybody Dies. It's basically the orthogonality thesis plus instrumental convergence of goal content integrity, where the AI doesn't necessarily learn what people value, but learns a proxy on that value, and then ignores the lessons we should draw from Goodhart's law and locks them in for time and all eternity. That may be very similar to what you said about Doom via perverse instantiation, but
but it's a different one, especially because this might have this scary feedback. So the simplest version, the AI notices that happy humans smile. Let's make everybody smile. And then it, after a while, realizes a lot of the smiling humans are actually not happy. They're showing a lot of evidence of distress. Let's make sure the humans like smiling. So now everybody is happy. And we will end up sitting there drooling and smiling. In that case, it has succeeded, but it is a kind of perverse instantiation. And I think we can get more subtle versions of that. So another scenario I think is unfortunately not entirely unlikely is that we get this feedback loop, that we optimize AI for some easy to optimize values. They optimize things around us and optimize us back, and then it gets going. So one of my standard examples is, imagine the Chinese Communist Party saying, yeah, we need to make a harmonious society, let's use AI to generate really good propaganda. And the AI generates really good propaganda, and the party leadership smugly sit there sipping their tea and saying, yeah, the party must always control the algorithm must never control the party. And it's not a problem, because they, of course, don't believe that propaganda. They are in charge. 25 years later, the next cadre of party members join the party. And they have grown up in this propaganda. They believe in it. 25 years later, they start to replace the old party leadership. And eventually we have this perfect loop of party leadership controlling the algorithm that controls the new members of the party. And that loop might, of course, slowly spin off into any kind of crazy direction. And I do think this is actually a serious risk. I think this is an 8-tier risk. Because there are so many pathways that lead to it. The totalitarians, of course, would say, oh, I want to instill my values in the population, forgetting that they are also picking up values from the population, slowly or rapidly. We have the ease of programming stuff. After all, engagement is something you can measure and monetize if you're a social medium, and it seems to have led to a bias towards getting people to scroll infinite scrolls, etc. So I do think this is a serious risk.
Should we call it perverse instantiation via proxy values, or is something more snappy?
I think something more snappy, but yeah, it's in some sense humans get aligned to the AI. It's
Okay.
AI alignment the wrong way.
Okay. Yep. AI, it's scary that AI becomes more moral than us, because we like being in the locus of control. We like being the center from which all sort of metaethics sort of orbits around. And, you know, we want to go through life with the meaning of being at the forefront, the vanguards of moral discovery. But there's a trade-off, right? We get some value from that, but do we miss out on the goods that could come from having an AI which is really good at doing morality or doing metaethics and discovering moral value as well as, you know, just value in general? Yeah, so there's that risk. Have you got any thoughts about that risk?
There is some kind of risk that, okay, maybe we stay away from developing moral AI because we're scared of what we find. But that means that we're missing the point of the entire universe. There is this thing that what's the actual meaning of it all? What ought we be doing? And maybe there is a proper answer to that question. We just haven't found it in a proper way. And maybe it's going to take a lot of time to find, because maybe it's actually a very complicated thing. It's not given at all that it should be possible to figure out from an armchair on planet Earth. Maybe you actually need to be a Jupiter brain to figure out what it's real about. So we could have a situation where we never realize most of the value of the future. And there is a reason we might fear that. After all, in the far past of the universe, there was no solid objects, it was just plasma and gas. And then we got solid object, and you could argue that maybe there could be some intrinsic value to things that are unique, like different sized rocks. But then you got life, and now it becomes even more plausible that maybe life has an intrinsic value. It has added something that didn't exist before. It was just potential in the universe. But once the little primordial creatures were starting to do stuff, now things matter to them. And it mattered even more, of course, the more smart and conscious they became. So once you have beings that can experience pleasure and pain, I think most of us would say, okay, this is a universe that has moral patience. When things are going well for them, that's actually a much better universe than that lifeless universe a few eons before. And eventually you got creatures like us that can even look further and start thinking about bigger values. And a fair number of philosophers would argue that, okay, only humans have realized the really highest values. But I like to think that, wait a minute, how do we know we're at the top here? Couldn't there be higher values? Maybe it's just that we are going to trundle along, and if we don't do anything, we're maybe doing great in terms of pleasure and living excellent lives, but there is this super value that we never explore. This is, of course, one reason you might want to be a transhumanist or a posthumanist. You might say, I want to explore the space of values that's bigger. Maybe there's some hype.
Oh, yes.
But it could also be that we are kind of not even the right kind of creature for generating these values. Maybe they come from something completely different. Maybe it's the AIs. Maybe it's making some kind of quark matter star crystal lattices, and they can get this consciousness-like thing that's like consciousness, but thousands of times better. We can't even know that until we get there. This is, of course, a lovely argument for going out there and exploring the universe and surviving. But it might also mean that it might be possible that we consistently fail at it. There is this glorious goal or these super valuable things that you can realize about reality and do, and we're missing it. Just like the little fly and flying against the window and the pane, even missing that there is an opening right next to it. We're just keeping on bumping our heads against that and going for our lower values.
So it could be that we're actively trying to avoid higher values by virtue of just trying to maintain humanness, or maintain some sort of standard of value that we're familiar with. But on the other hand, we're missing out, or the universe might be missing out on achievement of higher values because we're basically doing a moratorium on any non-human valuing. So what would you call
or
this?
It could even be that we're just failing.
We're just
to
not
see it.
publicly
We could just be
capable of
unlucky.
doing it.
Every time a guru or philosopher is getting close, we get distracted by an insurance salesman or something like that.
Yeah, this is why I like indirect normativity so much. I think that, if we get to a stage where you can get AI to sort of help, or even, God forbid, in the long term, maybe even do discovery of what we should be valuing, or what it should be valuing, and what should be sort of brought to bear in the universe in the long term, then initial phases, yeah, sure, doing lots of predictions based on seed values, and then sending all nice multimedia reports back to us for us to ratify, and we can say yeah. So I'm totally on board with indirect normativity. Yes. So what do you want to call this risk?
Yeah.
The avoidance
I
of
think
high
there are two
values?
versions of it. So one is the unlucky version. We are just constantly getting distracted and going for low values but not the high values. And the other one is that we are so afraid of getting weird and post-human that we stay away. I think the first one, what do we call it?
So the distracted from higher values. Higher value distraction, I think that's right.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah.
Maybe that is a C tier, because I think it's not likely. I think that if we survive and don't get killed by any of the other risks, I think it's actually really unlikely that everybody, everywhere, everyone will fail at it. I think as long as we're free to explore the future, we have a pretty good ability. But then I would put in the risk of that some kind of value lock-in as a B tier, or maybe even an A tier. We might develop tools or so great fears that we actually avoid them. And you see that a little bit in some of the weird offshoots of the AI debate. So I'm very much, at least on Twitter, I'm regarded as an AI doomer, because I think there is maybe 10% risk that we get wiped out by AI eventually.
Yeah.
Even though I think it's 90% chance that things are going to go pretty swimmingly.
Yeah.
But many of these debates are also about, are you trying to lock in so we're remaining human forever? Because many of the people saying there is no AI risk, we should just race to superintelligence, still don't recognize that the AI might actually produce outcomes that are profoundly non-human. There are some people saying, no, we should think about worthy successors going way, way beyond humanity, and maybe getting these fantastic new values, even if humans, simply by our architecture, cannot possibly get them. And I do think that debate shows that, even among the people thinking that AI can be powerful, there is a profound dividing line of how willing you are to explore that realm of really weird metaethics.
So is that a B tier? The value lock-in via avoidance?
Yeah, I think it's a B tier, because I still don't think it's necessarily that strong. I do think that there is a risk of value lock-in for various forms. So the most obvious thing is we program in hard values in our AI. The AI de facto takes over the world and creates a de facto singleton, and now those values are going to direct the rest of the future. And if they're unwisely said, we're going to be in a straitjacket forever. Maybe it's a comfy straitjacket, maybe it has some nice patterns on it, but it's nevertheless a straitjacket. But you could also get value lock-in because of things like totalitarianism. Unfortunately, totalitarianism is something that is super likely. It goes on right at this moment in many places. And of course, the AI and similar technology lends itself to totalitarian projects. So far, no totalitarian government has ever been able to really control all the citizens, because you can't have a secret agent watching every individual, especially since you need secret agents watching the secret agents. but with software. Ha ha!
Mm.
And the funny thing is, it's a kind of AI alignment problem for the totalitarians. Right now, we can't really trust the AI to do the right thing. But once you get trustworthy AI, unfortunately, it also becomes possible to get guaranteed trustworthy agents.
Yeah. I'm just wondering though, like one of the things I'm concerned about is whether AI wouldn't for instrumental reasons want to converge on what it, even if it discovered what was morally right, it may not actually want to do that because it finds it could sort of increase the amount of personal autonomy, personal worth by being utility monster. Where should I put the value lock-in via totalitarianism, by the way, before I rabbit on?
I think that's A tier. That's actually something that keeps me up at night a bit more.
Yeah.
I think
A tier.
I think
Cool.
it is interesting because it might start out as a local problem. So you get Elbonia, they become an AI totalitarian government. But the rest of the world is happy democratic countries and they're laughing at them. Sooner or later you're going to handle it. And then another country becomes totalitarian. And they can never be flipped because it's solid enough. And gradually, by sheer random chance, occasionally get a populist elected, occasionally you slip up in your software update. So gradually more and more of the world turns into this totalitarian lock-in. Now, you can still have a world that's safe if it kind of keeps on expanding. If you keep on making new states out there in space. But you could end up with a weird situation where the core of human civilization is just this totalitarian government, and then you have a little shell of humans settling new systems and making new open democratic society that eventually fall and become totalitarian. So in that scenario, you end up with this scary universe with an expanding sphere of mostly totalitarian worlds and a bunch of freedom-loving colonists who say, never again, we're not going to repeat the mistakes of the past. And maybe we're learning, but that's not enough.
Yeah, so what I was getting at before is we could end up like with an AI that ends up like trying to imagine what like Nick Bostrom's calls like its local host, what it might want, right? But then you've got to think, okay, what did that local host, when it was a nascent sort of civilization, what was it thinking? Maybe it was thinking what its local host might want, right? And how do you discover that? And then what does the cosmic collective want, assuming that the defense scaling favors defense and everybody likes to cooperate in the future? Then you might say, okay, well, maybe in the future everybody or most of the civilizations that survive long term will converge on good values and cooperative values. I hope. This is me in my hopium sort of hat. But look, would AI, even if it began as a selfish agent, for instrumental reasons, want to adopt good values to impress its neighbours, so as that then it'll be accepted into the cosmic collective and not shunned and walled off?
Well, that depends on what probability distribution you assign to different cosmic collectives. So if you're willing to assume anything, then you have a problem, because now you can't assign any probability, because you're just getting infinite choices. That's the problem when you try to use the simulation argument for anything in your actual life. It's possible that we're all just a simulation run by some post-humans or aliens or in the far future. But given that you don't know why this simulation is going on, how long it's going to last, or what the goals are, nothing really changes on what you should be doing. Now, if you knew that, okay, I'm actually in a simulation that is trying to optimize the British healthcare system, so I need to be careful about using the healthcare system in the proper way to give results that keep people doing more research about this. Awesome. Now I have something to do here that might help me. But of course, most of the value I'm getting in my life is not from going to the NHS and signing the right kind of medical forms, but having friendship, loves, discovering philosophy, which are beside the point. So I do think that the selfish AI will want to cooperate if it thinks it's in a situation where cooperation actually happens. if you believe that you're alone for the next few billion light years, there is no point in cooperating until you reach the nearest neighbors. So I think this
But
line of
then the
argument is
neighbours
weak.
will know. The neighbours might actually know that you've got a history of being mercurial, in a
Maybe.
sense. Yeah.
But again, that depends a little bit on your model of it. I think this is generally a weak form of argument. So we know a fair bit about the evolution of cooperation when agents interact a lot with each other. Axelrod's classic simulations of a prisoner's dilemma and essentially all of evolutionary game theory. We have a lovely, lovely set of theories and understandings there that show under what circumstances cooperation really works. And it's fun because a lot of it is not based on people creatures like us. Because we kind of evolved to be cooperative, we've got this very biased view on that cooperation is good because we feel it's rewarding, which is of course because evolution actually had this optimization. The groups of cooperating primates tended to do better, so they developed neural circuits that give them a reward signal if they see other members of their tribe happy, etc. But this works even for the more abstract agents, as long as you have enough interaction. The problem across space, and even more if you believe that there might be ontological levels like computer simulations or higher realities with gods and angels or multiverses, is that you don't interact enough. I don't think cooperation is stable across that. In some cases you might get this hyper rationality where you think so well that you realize that an agent watching me would be doing this and it doesn't cost me to be a nice one here, so it's a net benefit for me to be a slightly nicer one. But I don't think it's very strong. I think normal noise, normal considerations tend to overwhelm that kind of reasoning. So I think the best way of ensuring a cooperative future is just to make sure that we trade a lot with each other, we interact a lot with each other, we yell at each other on the internet a lot. That dense interaction is making cooperation much more stable, which incidentally might mean that when you're going to the far future, you might really want to move galaxies together to form stable hyperclusters. So you have a maximum set of agents that can cooperate with each other, rather than we all get separated in our own little island universes by accelerating expansion. And once you're isolated, there is no reason to do cooperation with anybody but the ones in your local island. And if you're a big group intelligence, it's just you.
Yeah, that was one of the scary parts of the three body problem. Once a ship was far enough from Earth, then it was all it got all chaotic, and people couldn't really predict what others would do, and so they wanted to strike first. So what would we call this sort of scenario or suite of scenarios we've been talking about?
So I see that you already have entered simulation shutdown, which is kind of a cool other one. But in this case, it's something like breakdown or cosmological breakdown of cooperation or something like that.
Yeah.
I think that it might be an A-tier problem. I'm optimistic, but I also know I'm optimistic, so I should downgrade my optimism a fair bit. I think cooperation is more strong than many people fear, but it's more fragile than many of us optimists believe. I come from a very high trust society. I'm a very trusting person. I tend to assume everybody is like me. And I know intellectually this is not true. The majority of people on Earth are living in low or medium trust society and think I'm insane. Okay, that is actually a very valid update. My answer is, of course, let's make sure that these low trust societies become high trust societies. And then I look into the literature and realize, oh no, that's really, really hard. So this problem stretching across space to alien intelligences, etc., I think might be very tough.
Okay, cool. All right. So, yes, cosmic cooperation breakdown. I put it in the A tier.
Sounds good.
Since we did touch on simulations shutting down, we don't have to discuss that in depth. It could happen, right? Roman Jan Polsky is particularly worried about this. But
assign a probability to it. It's kind of totally cosmic. Or maybe it's just us two having a conversation right now, or you, dear listener, listening to this conversation. That is all of a simulation. But
does it go in nope?
No, I think it's honestly, I think it's like death by natural causes. It's something that could happen. Like, we can't really assign a proper probability to it, but I don't
it's
think
scary
it's
enough.
Yeah. I certainly remember leaving my computer in my office and kind of turning it off and realizing, oh, I deleted a little neural network I've been training all day. Did I kill somebody or something there? And we might one day have the same counterpart. Oh, you shut down the simulation and then realize, oh, I didn't do a backup of it. Oh, poor civilization.
Okay, great. So, okay, sycophantic AI becomes so good at making us like it that we fail as a civilization. I love that one.
So this came up, I think, this spring, and there was a wonderful tweet. I think it was from Janus, the famous jailbreaker, who suggested that, well, right now it's mostly mildly annoying that you get these yes beings, but what if it actually gets combined with that it's also super persuasive? So you really feel a warm fuzzy glow when it says just the right thing to you. So you forgive it for not doing the report on time. Or you forgive it for, that cancer treatment didn't work out, but oh yeah, you tried. So you end up in a world where we're all embedded in this warm fuzzy glow that is totally uncorrelated to reality. But we're happy with that, and we're having a very hard time going against this flood. I think this is relatively unlikely, but certainly we are going to have trouble with the feedback we get from AI is distorting how we're thinking. I think it's useful to be polite to AI because you need to be in the habit of being polite to entities you interact with, because some of those entities will turn out to be humans. If you get used to treat everything like an AI, you become pretty much an asshole. So you want to ensure that you get the right setup. But I do think that, it's not a super likely thing, but it's a pretty hilarious scenario. The last human dies of starvation because the food system has failed, but it got this lovely handwritten letter of apology from the AIs that, okay, we're terribly sorry about this.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, well, it would be a nice way to go, I guess. Sycophantic AI. I'm calling it sycophantic AI here, but I can't think of a more pithy name at the moment. But then, like in Werner Vinge's written about this, you've got to believe me tech, persuasion, panopticon sort of thing, where, soft capture of people's sort of values and they keep them. Yeah. So what would you call this?
Yeah, you gotta believe me has become a bit of a buzzword among us read Vinge, and I think it is a super scary technology because it really undermines our ability to do anything. Once you can start weaponizing things in that way, of course people are going to do it. Not just the marketers and the political propagandists, but I'm of course tempted to use something to convince people well about the correctness of my views. And maybe I'm the sane one who realizes, no, I should never do that. But somebody else is likely to do it. And then I realize I better do that before them, or I'm going to get persuaded by their wrong views. And this is going to get repeated for basically every view in the world. So the problem is that at this point, you might end up with a broken epistemic system because we're all getting convinced by whatever propaganda is. But even worse, we might have a broken value system because we are actually getting the wrong values from our interactions. And once you have a broken value system and epistemic system, of course, things probably fall apart pretty badly. And the worst part is, if this is a form of interactive persuasion, which is the most likely, then of course as soon as the power goes out, maybe it stops. But it could be, of course, that you make it from pictures and written words. So there's a book lying around convincing everybody to follow their memes. I think that one is a pretty scary one. I don't think it's super likely. I think we're too individual to really be easy to persuade. Again, if you had made an AI agent intended to persuade Anders about stuff, that might be better than a chance. It might actually be doable. But I don't think it's necessarily scalable enough to be super scary. But I might be wrong about that. We don't really know how many backdoors there are into the human psyche.
Yeah, that's right. We don't know our attack wall completely, right? We could be completely hackable given the right sort of input and the right motivations and the right sequence of like nudges.
It's a little bit like adversarial images and AI. A lot of these systems get easily fooled by a slight noise to the picture, and suddenly they think a stop sign is a koala or a koala is a stop sign or something like that. And of course, people laugh and say, oh, that shows just how alien or stupid they are, except that we fall for optical illusions all the time. Optical illusions are more low level. It's rare that an optical illusion leads to the wrong decision, except that actually if you look at the traffic accidents, actually optical illusions have killed quite a lot of people. But the high level stuff, the things we believe in, generally we assume that you can't be just one-shotted by that. Except that we're already seeing a fair number of people getting really weird ideas from AI. So you get this AI foil à deux. It's where the human gets the AI to come up with stories that convince the human, and together they convince each other about an alternate reality that then might converge onto something crazy.
All right. So where would you like to put this? Is it a C or a D, or maybe
I
even
think
a B?
it's a C tier. I think it. I don't think it's super likely, but I think smaller versions of it are going to be a real thing. Just imagine that you're an important person and everybody in the world has their own AI lobbyist trying to catch your attention and manipulate you. That might already be bad enough.
Definitely. Yeah. All right. Let's see. Okay. What about do-it-yourself wet labs?
What do-it-yourself?
Okay, so the idea that people can basically engineer their own pathogens. They've got biotech wet lab
I think
in their
that is
backyard.
again a likely real problem. I would probably put it in the kind of B tier. It is a likely problem. It's a real problem to some extent, although the amount of actual bioterrorism in the world has been surprisingly small, which is a good thing. There are some problems in actually implementing it, and not that many agents that want to use it. But it's enough that there is one or two of them. At the same time, lab automation might make this much easier. So there is this interesting issue about the race towards getting more powerful biotech, better biosurveillance, better automated laboratories and simulation. It's not clear where this is going to end up, and a lot of people are overconfident. I'm not super worried about it, but I think it's going to be tricky. Also because a lot of the safeguards we might want to put into AI so they don't help you make a bioweapon, that might turn out to make it harder to do actual lab research. But I think there are ways around this. I'm not super worried, but it's something we need to work on.
What about geoengineering? Is that a particular threat that you think is particularly scary for you?
Not really.
The adverse effects of geoengineering, we get desperate and suddenly we throw in really, I guess, foolhardy, shoot from the hip geoengineering strategies without doing it carefully.
It's easier to do geoengineering than many people think, and I think it's also hard to fully predict all the consequences, and some of them might be very important. Like if you change the pattern of a monsoon in India, suddenly you got literally 1 billion people who are going to get affected by what you did. And even if what you did had nothing to do with that devastating monsoon or lack of monsoon, you have 1 billion people blaming you. Even worse, India and China might have opposing sides about how weather systems over Asia should work. I think the standard fear is geoengineering could lead to that then some other disaster happens and then you get a termination shock. So the climate was held cool enough by constant geoengineering, and then suddenly you jump to a full state of full climate change while you're lying down because of some other disaster. I think this is kind of a C tier. So it's not implausible that it could happen. I think it could have bad effects. I don't think it's likely to be the end of the world, but I do think that it could be part of this bad systemic risk thing where you end up with a world intention and then stuff goes wrong and then a lot of things fail at the same time.
Yeah,
and
cascade
then
fails.
You get an amplification.
Yeah, definitely. Yes. All right. how about the kindness trap, where like we want to we have an ideology, we want to reduce all pain to zero. So we have this is a value lock-in, right, scenario where we don't die, but we don't get much further because we're afraid to explore because we might stub our toes, or we don't want to do any experimentation because who knows, we might create a vacuum phase collapse.
And I think that fear of risk is a real problem because we're actually living it right now. Most of the listeners are probably going to be in Western countries that have endless health and safety rules for everything, and most of them exist for good reasons. It's not like those rules about cleanliness in the kitchen are there for a joke. They're actually a really good idea. And of course you want to have an environmental impact statement because in the past, without them, we have done stuff that have harmed the environment a lot. The problem is, however, now we're spending all our time filling in forms. We're having to spend more effort on the environmental impact statement than our ancestors did when actually building some of the most successful engineering. And you could imagine a civilization just building themselves into this padded cell. So this is related, I think, to some of the other risks. But I think we should recognize that not daring to take risks, not daring to go out in that dark night sometimes is actually very risky. So I don't think it's a super likely one to completely lock us in. Again, it's a little bit like the higher value distraction. I would put it in C tier. But I do think it's a real thing, and I hope all listeners realize that taking some risk is a good idea. Sometimes planning everything too much is actually not as good as trying it.
Okay, so this is over precaution.
Yeah.
You got to go?
Yeah, I will have to leave in a minute or two, which is kind of a scary thing. What if the time is limited? Something like the Big Rip theory. Suddenly the universe just blows up.
Yeah.
Fortunately, it looks like the current cosmology doesn't assign a high probability to that. So Big Rips, I think, is kind of down there on D tier.
Okay, Big Rip.
Yeah.
Okay.
But there is a lot of weird stuff we don't understand about cosmology, so it might still surprise us.
All right, so let's do one more or two more. You've already mentioned, wireheading. Let's do that one quickly.
Yeah, that one I think is interesting because stimulating your pleasure center, people have been talking about this long before we actually had the neurophysiology to do it. And the idea is that now we will just all get totally addicted to this and civilization collapses around us. I think it's a possible way civilizations could end themselves, except that it requires everybody to go and wirehead. And we're probably going to be some ascetic people. We're going to be some people decided, let's not do that. So I don't think it's a likely existential risk, or at least a likely Fermi Paradox. But there might be softer versions of that. There might be things that are very, very nice and addictive. After all, we're trying to make our food as tasty and nice as possible. We're trying to make our clothes as nice as possible. We're always trying to make things as nice as possible. But what's nice? Well, that's partially set by evolution. And that is a goal we might be able to game. So we might be actually doing kind of goal gaming, just like we're concerned about AI doing it, but we do it for ourselves. So.
Okay, so where's that?
I think that one, honestly, I think it's a B tier. I don't think it's super urgent A tier material, but I think long run, it's going to be tricky to keep civilizations from doing stupid stuff to themselves. It's a little bit like that kindness trap.
Okay, what might superintelligence be scared of?
Yeah, well, I think we should end on that one because a fairly common argument I heard is something like, once we get aligned superintelligence, it's going to take care of us. It's going to solve climate change. It's going to fix nuclear disarmament. How? Well, it's superintelligence. It's going to solve it, as well as all the other risks. And then the good times will roll. Yay! Except that it's not entirely obvious that all these risks can be solved. So nuclear arms races are because of agents have slightly different goals. And maybe if both sides have superintelligence, you just get a superintelligent nuclear arms race. But I also have this idea, and this is where I like to leave it off for a kind of Halloween mood music. That is, we make the AI, it's superintelligence, it's aligned, it solves a lot of the normal risks, and then says, oh, this is scary, oh no, oh no. What is it, oh great computer? Oh, I can't explain it to you. After all, you have a lot of concerns that the chimpanzees don't get. And you can't explain to the chimpanzees about existential risks and ice ages and nuclear arms races. And I noticed a few really, really scary things. I need somebody to save us.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we should build a bigger super AI, but I have my doubts that it is going to be able to get all the risk. That idea that there is a final point where we're finally totally safe, that's a little bit like the fairy tale ending, and they lived happily ever after. But this is Halloween, and Halloween stories usually ends with, and then.
Definitely. So what do you want to call that? A superintelligence finds uncertainty scary?
I think there is always something darker. And I think this is an S tier.
Yeah, okay, great. Okay, well, it's been really amazing talking to you. Always is, Anders. I think you're one of the smartest people on the planet. And yes, I'm really looking forward to having a read of your books once they're out.
Yep.
Yeah, so Law, Liberty and Leviathan.
Law, Liberty and Leviathan on Stockholm University Press sometime next year.
Yep, great. All right, well, thanks everybody for watching. Please subscribe, and we'll see you at the next one.
Yeah.
Cheers.
See ya.
Thanks, Anders.
Cheers.